Roman Reigns speaks. Fatu backstage truth. Off-air revelation. Italy fallout explained. Shocking backstage moment. What actually happened after WWE Clash in Italy when the cameras stopped rolling and Roman Reigns finally decided to speak? And more importantly, why is everyone suddenly talking about Jacob Fatu and a mysterious Jesus comment that nobody seems to fully explain? Because here's the thing, the show ended in Italy, the crowd went home happy, social media did what it always does, but backstage? That's where the story apparently didn't end. That's where things started getting a little uncomfortable, a little unclear, and a lot more interesting than what we saw on TV. So let's just step into it slowly, because this is one of those situations where the more you look at it, the more questions you end up with instead of answers. Roman Reigns doesn't usually rush to explain himself. That's not his style. He's the kind of guy who lets silence do most of the talking, and when he finally does speak, it usually feels intentional. Like every word is placed carefully. So when word started circulating that Roman had broken his silence after Clash in Italy, people immediately leaned in a little closer. Because what does that even mean in this case? Was it about Jacob Fatu's intensity? Was it about the tension that's been building around new bloodline energy? Or was it something else entirely that caught him off guard backstage? And then there's that strange detail, the Jesus comment. Now, before anyone jumps to conclusions, let's be clear, this isn't about turning anything into something it's not. In wrestling, sometimes people say things offhand, sometimes emotions run high, sometimes comments get repeated out of context until they turn into something bigger than they ever were. But still, the fact that this detail even surfaced is what makes everything feel different. Because nobody was expecting Roman Reigns and Jacob Fatu to be part of the same post-show conversation that also somehow includes a moment that people are now calling the Jesus remark. And that alone has fans doing what they do best, overanalyzing every second of it. Let's rewind a bit. Clash in Italy had that kind of energy WWE loves when it's outside the US. Loud crowd, unpredictable reactions, that feeling that anything can happen at any moment. Roman Reigns' presence alone changes the temperature of a show. You don't even have to see him wrestle sometimes, you just feel when he's around. That aura, that silence before something big happens. And Jacob Fatu, well, he's not exactly the kind of guy you ignore either. There's a different kind of energy there. More chaotic. More explosive. Like he's always 1 second away from doing something that nobody can really control. And when you put that kind of energy in the same ecosystem as Roman Reigns' calculated dominance, things don't just coexist, they clash, even when they're not officially clashing. So after the show, backstage becomes the real battlefield. Not in a violent way, but in that subtle wrestling way where every look, every handshake, every pause matters. According to what started circulating, Roman Reigns wasn't angry, wasn't loud, wasn't anything dramatic like that. If anything, the reaction was described as calm, almost observant. Like he was processing something rather than reacting to it. And that's what makes it interesting. Because when Roman Reigns gets quiet, it's usually when something bigger is forming in his head. Now let's talk about Jacob Fatu for a second, because his name keeps coming up in this conversation for a reason. Jacob Fatu isn't new to intensity. He carries that Samoan wrestling legacy with a very unfiltered edge. There's no corporate polish on him. He doesn't feel like someone trying to fit into a system, he feels like someone the system has to adjust around. And that kind of energy either fits perfectly into a story, or explodes it from the inside. So when fans hear that Roman Reigns acknowledged him after Clash in Italy, even indirectly, that already sets off alarms in the best possible way. Because Roman doesn't acknowledge just anybody unless it matters. And now we get to the weird part. The Jesus comment. Some versions of the story suggest it was said in reaction to something unexpected backstage. Others say it was a passing remark during a heated but not hostile conversation. And then there are fans who are already turning it into a symbolic thing, like it has some deeper meaning tied to Roman's mindset or Jacob Fatu's unpredictability. But let's be real for a second, wrestling fans will turn a cough into a prophecy if you let them. Still, it's the kind of detail that sticks because it feels out of place. It doesn't belong neatly in the usual post-match respect category. It feels like one of those moments that got overheard, misremembered, repeated, and suddenly turned into something bigger. And that's where WWE storytelling and real-life backstage moments always blur. Because even if something small happens, once it hits the internet, it becomes a full storyline. Now imagine this scene for a second. Backstage in Italy. The energy is still high. People are moving around. Production is winding down. Roman Reigns is there, calm as always, surrounded by that quiet respect that follows him everywhere. Jacob Fatu is nearby, still carrying that post-match adrenaline. Conversations are happening in different corners of the room. And somewhere in that environment, a comment gets made. Something sharp, something unexpected, something that gets repeated later in whispers. That's all it takes. One moment. And suddenly the entire fanbase is trying to decode it like it's a hidden message in a movie. Now, what makes this even more interesting is how Roman Reigns typically handles things like this. He doesn't rush to explain. He doesn't jump on interviews immediately to clarify every rumor. He lets the noise build. He lets people wonder. And by the time he does speak, if he chooses to speak, it usually lands harder than anything he could have said immediately. And that's why breaking silence in this context feels more like strategy than reaction. So when we say Roman Reigns broke his silence, it's not like he suddenly sat down and gave a full confession-style explanation. It's more like pieces of acknowledgement started surfacing. Small confirmations. Subtle nods. Enough to fuel conversation, not enough to close it. Which, honestly, is very Roman Reigns. He doesn't close doors too early. He leaves them slightly open, just enough for you to keep thinking about what might come next. And fans? They walk right through that door every time. Now let's talk about what this could actually mean moving forward. Jacob Fatu's presence in WWE is already something people are watching closely. You don't bring someone like that in without expecting ripple effects. And when you add Roman Reigns into the same narrative space, even indirectly, you're basically setting the stage for either mentorship tension, faction pressure, or straight-up collision down the line. Not necessarily today. Not necessarily tomorrow. But the seeds? They're always what matter most in wrestling storytelling. And Roman Reigns is basically the king of long-term seeds. Remember how many stories started small with him and turned into full-blown eras? So when his name gets tied to someone like Jacob Fatu, even in a post-show rumor context, fans don't ignore it. They start connecting dots that may or may not exist yet, but that's part of the fun. And then you've got that Jesus comment floating around like a weird puzzle piece nobody knows where to place. Is it important? Maybe. Maybe not. But in wrestling, perception is often love.